Good morning, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. We're going to start with today's Community Services Committee for Tuesday, May 23rd, 2023. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa se trouve sur un territoire non cédé de la nation algonquine-nationale, whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We haven't received any regrets, so I will ask the committee coordinator to call the roll.
Councillor Brown.
Here.
Councillor Carr.
Morning.
Councillor Desroches. Councillor Hill.
Present.
Councillor Kavanagh.
Present.
Councillor King.
Here.
Councillor Lowe.
Here.
Councillor Plante.
Ici.
Councillor Troster.
Here.
Vice Chair Bradley.
Here.
Chair Dudas.
Chair Prezant.
You have quorum, Chair.
Thank you very much, Eric. Before we start the agenda, I just want to take a moment to note the launch of the city's anti-racism strategy. Last week, the city achieved a significant milestone with the official launch of its anti-racism strategy. This strategy is a commitment to repairing relationships with Indigenous, African, Caribbean, Black, and other racialized communities through truth, reconciliation, and community healing. Everyone deserves to feel safe in our city, to feel respected, and to have access to resources and opportunities, regardless of their ethnic or racial background. The strategy is the product of extensive community consultation and will guide the city as it works to eliminate systemic racism in all city policies, practices, programs, and services. I'm going to ask Eric to show a short video that speaks a little bit about the strategy that was launched last Monday.
The City of Ottawa is launching a 5-year anti-racism strategy to repair relationships with Indigenous, African, Caribbean, Black, and other racialized communities through truth, reconciliation, and community healing. Our goal is to ensure that racism is no longer a barrier to an individual's safety, resources, and opportunities.
The anti-racism strategy has 7 priorities: institutional practices, housing, governance, the economy, health, children and youth, and racial equity in the workplace.
This strategy is a call to action for all of Ottawa to work together to understand, confront, and dismantle systemic racism.
Thank you very much, Eric. I want to thank the community, Councillor Ralston King, City Council's liaison for anti-racism and ethnocultural relations initiatives, and city staff for their contributions to the creation of this strategy. I would now ask Councillor King to say a few words.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to express my sincere appreciation to both city staff and community members for their collective hard work over the past 3.5 years, which has led to the launch of the first stage of the anti-racism strategy. I'm quite proud of the work that the Anti-Racism Secretariat undertook in consultation with over 1,000 residents to create the city's first anti-racism strategy in 2022 that outlines a blueprint to address racial disparities that impact the Black, Indigenous, and racialized communities. The city's anti-racism strategy aligns with the work of the City of Ottawa's Women and Gender Equity Strategy and the Municipal Reconciliation Action Plan, and recognizes that to combat racism and discrimination, it is not sufficient to simply equip people with knowledge and tools. It is also important that we expose and address all forms of racism, whether overt and covert, interpersonal and institutional, current and historical, persistent and nascent, to aid in the advancement of equal opportunities when Ottawa residents deal with their municipal government. The strategy will enable substantive action that will meaningfully and measurably address the multiple barriers and disadvantages that many people in our city face. We heard very clearly from Ottawa residents that they want issues of racial inequity addressed in governance, housing, economic development, health, child and youth development, the workplace, and institutional practices. The 5-year anti-racism strategy provides 28 recommendations and 132 actions to proactively identify and remove systemic barriers from city policies, programs, and services to help realize racial equity. Implementation of the anti-racism strategy will lead to data-based practical actions which will enable systemic and structural change to create new models for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is very important that the city takes a lead role in ending all forms of discrimination and oppression in order to create an Ottawa where all residents are treated with dignity and respect. I'm extremely optimistic that we can be successful in this worthy and moral endeavor by ensuring that the strategies, recommendations, and actions are translated into substantive investments by City Council. And I know that all members of Council would agree. Thank you so much, Chair.
Thank you so much, Councillor King, and thank you for all your hard work on this over the years. So moving on to the agenda, on to item number 2, we have not received any declarations of interest. Item number 3 is the confirmations of the minutes. Is the minutes confirmed?
Confirmed.
Confirmed. Responses to inquiries. We have summer programming at Park and Rides, and that item has been listed on the agenda. Anyone wish to lift that item? No, seen as none. That item is received. We're now on to item 5.1, which is the update to local rules under the Housing Services Act 2011. We don't have any delegations, nor do we have a presentation. However, staff are here to answer any questions anyone might have about this item. Does anyone have any questions about this?
I do. Are we going to lift it or just going to?
Oh, it's on the agenda.
Oh.
So it doesn't need to be lifted. Okay, so if you haven't, yeah, sure.
That's great.
Maybe will you continue to use Zoom, and if you guys want to raise your hands on it, then I'll know the order. You're still first.
Okay.
Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much. So am I to understand that most of these rules are being changed because of provincial directives?
Through you, Chair, yes.
Okay. Let me just go through and take a look at some questions that I have here. So are we changing any of the rules because of our own initiative, or is it simply to comply with provincial legislation?
The changes represent our response to provincial legislation and what we feel we need to change. Most of them align to provincial directives and standards. There is one rule where we are proposing that we provide more time for people who are determined to be overhoused to seek a better housing situation. And that goes beyond the provincial standards. So we're actually, I feel, providing a better outcome through this change.
That's great. So the change where people only have one housing option, they get one offer and then RGI can be removed and they're taken off the list. That's a provincial directive?
Correct. That's a provincial directive.
That's really unfortunate. I just have a question. The asset limit of $50,000 for households. So somebody's not eligible for RGI if their household has a higher asset base. My question is, what if someone loses their income or gets laid off and they're nowhere close to retirement age and they might have a small pension put away somewhere that they can't unlock? Is that still considered an asset, which means they wouldn't be eligible for subsidized housing?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, the asset or the income would be calculated as part of the review process.
So they'd have to drain their pension before, or they'd have to drain anything up to $50,000.
Right, there would be some stipulation around divestment.
And again, that's a provincial change or is that something we instituted?
No, that's across the board.
Okay, one more question. If a household loses access to the RGI subsidy, let's say they do start working, does that mean are they converted to market rent in that same unit, or does that mean that they have to move out of that home?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, they can remain and become market rent unit. in that situation. If they no longer qualify for the subsidy,
Right.
they can remain and pay market rent.
So if they're an Ottawa community housing home, for example, then they would just pay market rent. Okay. Thank you. I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Councillor Troster. Councillor Carr.
Thank you very much. It might take me a second to be organized. Sorry. I do have a couple questions on the report, and specifically that so I noted that now because of the asset limits we have, because of the income limits, there's approximately 327 households that are over the limit, but nothing will be done with respect to, they're grandfathered in now, correct?
When we look, when we have assessed how many households on the centralized waiting list would be affected by these updates, we estimate about 3%, which is about 300 and plus families who may not be eligible once the asset and income limit eligibility calculations are applied. It will not affect people currently receiving RGI.
So for those people that are, the 3% that are impacted that currently have an RGI unit, they'll basically be grandfathered into that unit, or when they're reassessed on an annual basis, they'll be impacted. I wanted to understand that a little bit more.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the 327 households that you're referring to are the ones that are currently waiting on a centralized wait list for subsidized housing. Those will no longer qualify for a rent guarantee income housing. However, there are other higher threshold, more affordable programs available for them, such as the affordable housing program and the below market rent. So we'll be working with those households to see if they can't qualify for the RGI, what kind of assistance we can provide to them.
Okay, so I probably missed in the report, are there units within the, that are currently RGI occupied that will be impacted by these changes?
So the income is not so much an issue because it's reviewed annually. The assets, based on our assessment, although we don't know what the exact impact is going to be, we're already doing some verification around assessments. For example, home ownership and divestment of that. If the person has registered savings that is taxable, that has to be reported to their Canada Revenue Agency, which would appear on their notice of assessment that they need to submit as part of document verification.
Okay, and so when they provide this assessment, it's on an annual basis that
Correct.
they are reviewed, and that information goes to housing provider, whether it's the OCH or Gloucester Housing or Nepean Housing, it's provided to them,
Correct.
which in turn is updated through the, is it updated to the city, to you as
Yep.
a service manager? And so just a question, there was a talk about random audits being done by the city.
Mhm.
So how often are those done? And like what percentage is audited on a annual basis?
That's a good question. I don't have the exact numbers with me right now, but we can get you that information in terms of the exact number of audits. Those are the audits for fraud related, right?
And so when I look at the RGI units, so we only have about 17,000 RGI units in the whole city of Ottawa. And those numbers will not grow because the program no longer exists, right? So no matter how many people we get in, how many people come and live in our hotels and motels and require these units, we're never going to go past 17,000. And so I know when I pulled data from your area before, there's a stopping point because we have about 400, we have lots of people who are overhoused on that wait list of 12,000 people. And there's about 400 families that need 1-bedroom units that are in 3, 4, 2 bedrooms. I know I've got the data from you before. will these changes that you're implementing help clear that, that backlog at all and help the list move? Because it's my understanding on that list of about 12,500 that really there's only about 1,000 that are actually homeless, that most of those are unhoused, and that most of they're just looking to move around within the system. Can you clarify that and then speak to whether or not these changes will actually help with that backup on the overhoused list?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, that is the intent behind the revisions that have been made. You're right in that historically, there's been a lot of households that have remained in their current home that was deemed overhoused. And so these more stringent regulations will make sure that that there is an outflow of the people that are overhoused more quickly, and so that those units are more available to families that are more in need of the larger homes.
Okay, I'll just ask a couple more questions and then I'll get back on the list. Thanks, because I know I'm gonna take over my time limit. With respect to the asset rules and the changes there, are those assets, are they only assets in Canada that you're looking at?
That is a good question. I'm not sure. We'll have to get back to you on that.
I would say that as per the Housing Services Act, the requirement to declare all assets, even foreign owned.
Thank you. And then just my last question for the time being, the local priority rules. So the consultations that happened on these rules talked about with the stakeholders. Can you just clarify, like, are these in the housing and homelessness sector, or were they individuals that are living in these units at all? If you can just speak to the stakeholders that were consulted, and also if you could speak to when council will be able to take a look at those local priority rules as well, if there's updates in the future.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. Yes, the staff completed a broad consultation process, starting with the housing providers, and then beyond the social housing providers, as detailed in the report. We have a details section of the report. We initiated also online surveys that the providers could provide their feedback in the various areas to make sure that we cover a broad range of feedback from different stakeholders. So it has been a very comprehensive across the sector, but not just limited to social housing providers.
Okay.
The second question.
The second question was if the local housing rules will come back to city council at any point, whether part of the 10-year homelessness refresh or
Yes.
when is the next time that would be available for council to review those rules?
Thank you. Yes, we can certainly include that as part of our 10-year plan refresh, which will be completed in 2024. So what you're referring to are the local rules that council has authority or flexibility to modify, to add, to delete. And those, in particular, some of them, council may want to review. It's been a while. It's been since 2017 since we did our last comprehensive review of the local priorities. So it would be very timely in the next 10-year plan refresh to include those.
Thank you. I'll go back on the list.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Troster.
Hi, I'm back. Okay, just one quick question. So this wait list that is now at 11,000 households that you mentioned in the report, is that just for RGI or is that for the full suite of housing support?
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Mostly RGI, but it can include also below market rent units.
Okay, so if your name comes up on
And
the
rent
list.
supplements as well.
Okay, so if somebody is on that list now,
Yeah.
dutifully updating their paperwork every year, they're found that their assets are slightly over what allows them, does that mean they can't be on the list anymore? Or it just means that if their name comes up, they're not eligible for the RGI option? Like, does it mean they're gonna get kicked off the waiting list?
The
if-
327?
Yeah.
That's right. They're going to get off the list, but they're still going to be able to access other housing programs that are not part of that list.
But is there a waiting list for those other housing programs?
Yes.
Okay, so how's this communicated to people who are on this list and in this situation?
We worked very closely with the housing providers and the registry, which will update the information. Housing providers will be in direct contact with the household through various means. Our staff are working on the development of communication products with the service providers. Our program administrators work very closely with the providers to make sure that we use a variety of different tools to make sure that people have the information.
I guess my concern is, we know that this list is years long. So somebody might have assets that are slightly too high, but if they continue to be in an economically precarious position, they may drain those assets over the years while they're waiting on the list. So my question is, if they get removed from the list, they lose their priority position. In the interim, they drain their assets, they go back on the list and they're down here when they should be up here. I'm just wondering how we might foresee a situation like that and how we might address it. Because it just seems unfortunate, right? Because if somebody's in a really precarious position, they finally drain their last dollar, they're eligible again for RGI, and then they're away at the back of the list when they probably should have stayed here because during the waiting period, they were draining their assets.
So through you, Madam Chair, I think what Paul's explaining is that we work with a systems group of service providers. We have a management relationship with the registry. We work closely with the registry. And through those relationships, there's daily constant communication. We're also advised of households who may qualify for rent supplement or other housing benefits. And we make efforts through then the contracts we have with local providers, housing search workers, through those relationships and contracts to ensure the families on the list are constantly made aware of their options and opportunities. It's not a perfect system, as you're underscoring. The system is designed to best effort ensure that those who are in greatest need are offered first opportunity.
Okay, thank you. I just think it's really important that people know what the options are, and if they want to maintain that spot, that they need to use some of their own assets. I just worry about somebody slipping through the cracks in that scenario and have their economic situation become much more precarious while they're waiting and then lose that opportunity. But thank you very much.
Merci, Conseiller. Conseiller Plante.
Oui, merci. Ma question est sur la page 14 et peut-être qu'il y a une nuance qui m'échappe là avec la traduction, mais ça dit Emergency Shelter Solutions et peut-être vous pouvez m'offrir une explication parce que de ce que j'ai pu constater, les refuges d'urgence, les salles d'urgence, les banques alimentaires, c'est plutôt pour dépanner les gens, ce n'est pas une solution à long terme. Alors, pourriez-vous expliquer l'utilisation du mot solutions? Merci.
Merci pour la question. And through you, Madam Chair, the term housing solutions is a broad term that's used as part of the funding framework and the funding streams that we receive under the contract with the province. It includes emergency shelters and other solutions that may include outreach and other services. So it's a range of shelters that would include emergency shelters, transition shelters, shelters for youth, young women, etc.
But I think we can agree that that's not, like, emergency shelters are not a long-term solution.
Emergency shelter, through you, Madam Chair, emergency shelters are part of a system of supports that is part of our housing system as a whole. They provide short-term emergency shelter, and the goal is to move people out of short-term emergency shelter to housing. That's the goal as part of our 10-year plan.
Thank you for confirming.
Merci. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your work on bringing in these provincial changes. I take it the goal is to reduce the list? Is that why they're putting in, the provinces saying they're putting in these new rules?
Through you, Madam Chair, without speculating as to the intentions behind the provincial decisions, we are facing a housing crisis. We know that there's a shortage of affordable housing, and these rules demonstrate an effort to ensure that those who have the greatest need are often offered first opportunity for a deeply subsidized unit.
So do we still have priority for those that are in motels, et cetera, that are in our emergency shelters? Are they the top priority?
Through you, Madam Chair, homelessness is a priority designation. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I think if I understand, and I apologize if you're repeating, for those that are overhoused, currently, they're being offered a different unit, smaller unit, I guess. So that they're in the system right now, but it depends on the availability of these units, correct? Smaller units. And
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, certainly. And that's why they're given a period of time, a year to search, but also work with a tenant support worker to identify available units or units that may be available that meet their needs in terms of family composition. So yes, it depends on the availability of units, yes.
is the majority in Ottawa community housing?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes.
Okay, thank you. No, I'm just concerned about the jump. I mean, in terms of, you were talking about other programs that people may be qualified for because given the differential between even if they pay market rent in these affordable units and the private market, it's a huge gap. Can you give us a little bit more about the other housing programs if they don't qualify for RGI?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. If they don't qualify for RGI, there is affordable housing programs which could be average market rent or 80% of average market rent. There's below market rent programs as well. There are housing allowances as well, that various housing allowance programs that are available for different target groups as well.
Are they expected to grow? Because obviously that category is going to get bigger and bigger with the rent market right now.
That is a target as part of our 10-year housing and homelessness plan, is to grow the availability of housing subsidies. Yes.
Okay, beyond RGI.
Correct.
Okay, and we get the funding from the province on those, or are we funding that ourselves?
It's a combination of provincial and municipal funding.
Okay.
No federal funding goes towards housing allowances.
Okay, something to look at in the future. Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. Councillor Carr.
I'll be quick, I promise. So one question that comes to mind in light of my colleague's question, I know Councillor Troster was asking about, do you become ineligible for one program while you're waiting? And that to me, it's one of the issues that seems to me when we are dealing with the limited amount of RGI stock, we're dealing with a big list. And we've got programs like the COB, the Canada Ontario Housing Benefit, where if you accept that program, which is not in perpetuity, like the RGI programs, that you're removed from the registry list. So that's a big issue because people are apprehensive about their future if they're getting part-time work or contract work. It's quite complex. And so how can we, this is probably a little bit deeper than this report, so I'll just foreshadow my question and probably can't be answered, but how can we incentivize the use of these programs that are not in perpetuity in order to, as we continue to have people coming here looking for these RGI units, what can we do to have programs where there's more guarantee in order to continue to serve the population that needs the RGI units. Like, I guess that's work that's being done in the housing and homelessness plan. If you could just speak to that a little bit, and then I've got a couple other questions.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. And typically, yes, you're right, Councillor, that there's some issues there around uptake for those housing allowances. And staff do a lot of education, a lot of promotion of those housing allowances. Part of the decision making in those situations for the household is the risk and benefits to the decision that they need to make. And we really support, the families in making that decision with informed choices. So having all of the information they have readily available so they can make their choices. So one could wait. Right now, the average wait time for RGI on the centralized wait list is 5.27 years. Or you could get a housing allowance right away that will get you into housing out of the shelters, and you're on your way. So far, it's long-term, and it's unfortunate that we can't say it's forever, as long as you need it. That's the way the program is set up. So we do inform the clients around the limitations of the program. But again, weighing out the pros and cons, and the pros is that they're going to get housed very much quicker.
So is there advocacy that should be done to the province, perhaps on the COB, for example, that accepting that removes you from the list? And is there advocacy work that's being done by your area on that particular piece?
Yes, all the time. We are in constant contact and providing information to the province about, what we're seeing on the ground, our experiences, and what we learn, and what the experiences of our clients is on the ground, and pass that on as part of our feedback.
Okay, I just have a follow-up question too. Councillor Troster asked a question about a pension plan specifically, but I noted on the report that under regulation 36711, section 32.5, that funds in a registered retirement savings plan, funds in a RIF, and funds in an RESP wouldn't be included, but a pension plan itself would be. Like if I had a pension plan from my job, that would be counted as assets or income. So it's not the capital that's in the fund that would count, but it's the money that's paid out as income, correct?
Could we, through you, Madam Chair, we would take that question back. It's a little deeper in detail than we're come prepared to answer today. I would like to your previous question, Councillor, ask Paul to speak to the innovative pilot program that we identify in the report for families, especially large families. Is that in the other?
Yes.
I'm so excited about that initiative that we'll come back to that.
Councillor Carr, are you?
Okay, yeah, I'll just ask one more question because I realize that I monopolized the questions. The change in having 3 housing offers to 1 housing offer for overhoused communities, and I understand, that's difficult because people want to stay in the community in which they've raised their family, and that's part of the challenge when moving with this. But do you have any idea of forecasts on how much you anticipate that particular change to make a difference in terms of people accepting the first unit or being able, like the movement on the list, if that makes sense?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think one of the benefits is that in the first year, you have the right to refuse offers, and you might want to, you have the opportunity to select many communities. So at least you have the year to decide if the offer is good or not. And hopefully, by the time the second year starts, then people will have access to that unit. Hopefully it will result in people moving and unclogging the system and making sure that both households have their needs met. The one that is overhoused and the one that needs a larger unit. And as for your previous question, Counselor, the yes, pension is income and could count toward the income limits.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you very much. I'll save my next set of questions for the next report.
Counselor Troster.
Okay, thank you. This is probably going to lead into the exciting pilot that you want to, that you have put forward for larger families. But am I correct in assuming that people will opt to stay on the list and wait for RGI and refuse a portable housing benefit because rents are too high for that portable benefit to make enough of a dent?
Through you, Madam Chair, there are many, I think what committee is identifying that is a reality is the complexity of the system and the complexity of need. And then the complexity of the rules that we are legislated to implement to help govern that system. And that is why, as we present this local rules report that gives us a little bit of discretion as staff, we also, the next report that gives us, again, some discretion to move funding where the greatest needs are. That is how the system works, is that we're able to identify where there's a greatest need and then lever all of the various, whether it's funding or relationships or systems that we have at our disposal to actually wrap around that family and meet that need. And so it is a complex system that's designed to, one, get people off the list as quickly as possible and get them housed as quickly as possible. What we do is we wrap around with housing support workers, the registry staff who are wonderful and have relationships with people on the list. And the regular reporting, that sort of annual reporting, also enables the housing provider to build a relationship. To maintain that relationship, we would hope that they do it more often than that, but it gives a formal opportunity for them to have those conversations with that family. So it's very rare. I would put forward that it's very rare for a family to be in an RGI unit and all of a sudden be told they have to leave. That is not the reality on the ground. The housing provider would identify really early on, work with the family, and we would wrap around other supports with people on the centralized waiting list. But as I said earlier, it's an imperfect system.
Counselor Troster, you're done. Okay. Counselor Lowe.
Thank you, Chair. I want to know if there is a plan to set up, whether it's emergency, transitional, supportive, or just low-income housing in general. Is there a plan to set these up citywide instead of just concentrating them in certain areas of the city? I don't think, especially when it comes to families, I don't think they should be forced to choose between downtown or bust.
Through you, Madam Chair, just a point of clarification. Is this a question that relates to local rules?
At least in my mind, at least in going with the conversation.
Could I ask you to repeat the question then, Councillor?
Is there a plan to kind of include some of these options in across the city, not just downtown? Because I do see need, especially when it comes to some families and some people just might not want to always be downtown when looking for these options.
Through you, Madam Chair, in terms of emergency shelter, transitional support options, they are located across the city. Our opportunity to identify suitable emergency shelter accommodations for families, especially large families, is hampered by availability in the system of available units. Our attempt is always to identify the emergency shelter options that are available across the city and where there are services nearby as well across the city.
Councillor, okay. Councillor Plante.
Oui, merci. I was just wondering, beyond a big bag of money, what would help alleviate a lot of the stress in the system? Like if you had a baguette magique, like what are some of the things you would like to see change in this system? Other than obviously a big bag of money.
Madam Chair, how much time do we have for the committee meeting? What we do as staff and the 10-year plan that's going to be refreshed next year is a 10-year plan that's refreshed every year because of the fact that the environment that we're in changes, the economy changes, the availability of housing changes, the pressures on service providers change, and the acuity level of people who are finding themselves homeless is shifting and changing and becoming more and more acute each and every day. There is no one. Thank you for your question. I wish we had a magic wand that we could wave. There is no one direct answer. Our ideal scenario would be that we maintain a system of housing, a housing system whereby people who are in the most dire need are able right away to find an emergency shelter placement, quickly move out of that shelter placement once they're stabilized, have an available supportive housing or transitional housing placement. And then once they're even further, if they're capable, move into a more permanent, independent living situation. That is the ideal, and that's what we're working towards. So every decision that we're making as part of the reports we bring forward is towards that end. And that's why, with the support of our council, this committee and council as a whole, we've always had the philosophy that someone in Ottawa, especially in the winter, who needs a bed has a bed available. And that's why we have a range of housing options available to people. And the goal is always, always to increase supportive housing and permanent housing and to move people through. So any magic wand would enable us to do that quickly so that we can diminish emergency shelter stays, we can diminish emergency shelter need, and we can increase the number and the availability and number of safe, affordable units for people who require them.
And just a quick follow-up, because this is what I'm hearing from the service providers. I heard you say once they're in the emergency shelter and then they get stabilized and then they move to supportive housing. My understanding is that the housing piece is the stabilizing part, and that it's the emergency shelter part that's really destabilizing for people, because not knowing if you'll have a bed in the morning, having to leave in the morning, having to then find your meal, and then not having that permanent place is really what's causing a lot of people to be in distress. And that actually giving people a roof over their head, no matter what their sort of acuity level, is really what stabilizes them, not only in the short term, but obviously in the long term as well. So I just wanted to clarify that's what I'm hearing from service providers in the supportive housing industry, that there's, if you look at a place like Options Bytown, they have a 92% success rate of taking chronically unhoused people and giving them supportive housing. So that's what I'm hearing on my end, is that the acuity level is due to the emergency shelters, not a place for them to get stabilized, because it's sort of like an emergency room. It's sort of like a banque alimentaire. Like, it's not a place for stability. It's a place you go in an emergency.
Okay, merci, Concierge. I am just going to remind everyone I will definitely throw it to you. Everyone's welcome to ask questions. I do want us to stay on topic, though. We are talking about the local rules. A lot of this has been delegated by the province that we have to update these. Hasn't been done since 2017. I know on the next item, we will be speaking to the homeless prevention program investment plan. So some of these questions might find a home there as well, too. But I just want to remind folks we're on the local rules item. So Councillor Carr.
I'm going to relate it to local rules. So in this report on local rules, obviously it's speaking to the RGI units. And we mentioned earlier that, there's only 17,000 and there only ever will be 17,000 because even as our population grows, this is a grandfathered program. And so I know that, that on that social housing registry, there's also BMR. But just in terms of when Councillor Kavanaugh was asking questions about OCH being the majority, they have the majority of the RGI units, that sort of thing. Now that we have new types of affordable housing, OCH has a new affordable housing portfolio for their new units that are no longer RGI. And they they seek tenants through a whole different means. So you've got all these new affordable housing providers that are looking for tenants on themselves, doing their own marketing, trying to attract, running their own programs. So what does that mean for the social housing registry and their role? And so probably it's a little bit above local rules, but anyway, something I would like to have a discussion about, because when we're dealing with those 17,000 units on RGI, and I don't know how many BMR units there are, maybe 2,000, but not sure how many there are, but it's the same list. It's the same people on the list. Just in terms of how do we consolidate all of that? I mean, I understand this is the local rules for just specifically to the RGI, but we're looking at that breadth of programs and how to get people more, to get them housed and in place. I just think as the population of Ottawa grows, the people looking for homes grows, and we're still dealing with a list for 17,000 units. Just be interesting to talk in the future about what we do about that.
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. So yeah, definitely the registry, this is the single access point for subsidized housing. Having said that, not everyone will qualify for the deepest subsidy, which is rent geared to income. And so that's a separate group. Then we also have a separate list, which is called the BMR list. And affordable housing falls under the BMR list. So there's different lists, and I know it can be confusing, and certainly, you know, in the spirit of continuous improvement, we can certainly, you know, I'll make note of that and see what we can put into our next 10-year plan to see how we can streamline the system to make it more efficient. We have made some great strides, but I think there's always room for improvement, and we can certainly take that back and work with our community partners and our agencies to make it so that it's a better experience for people who are accessing services.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that's a little bit outside of the question, but it just, with all these new affordable housing programs, and for example, like Herongate, you know, they have their own program that they're going to be administering, and in my community. And I know with everyone creating new affordable housing, it just seems as if there's just a lot of data and lists out there, but I understand you're looking at that.
Thank you for that question, and through you, Madam Chair. I also want to remind committee that we do invest in housing support workers and shelter support workers who are constantly working with people who are using emergency shelters or on the list to try and find affordable units. So there's a constant, the community service providers that Councillor Plant spoke to work as a sector, as a system, to try and ensure that rapid housing is occurring and people are placed in affordable units across the system.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. That was excellent questions, excellent discussion. Thank you for the answers. So the report recommendations before us is that the Community Services Committee recommend Council approve the local rules as updated and set out in full in document 1. Is this item carried?
Carried.
Great. Wonderful. Item 5.2 is the Homelessness Prevention Program Investment Plan 2023-2024. We have no delegations on the list. We also do not have a presentation. Before we go to any questions from anyone, I do want to quickly read out the recommended, like what we're being asked to approve, because I think that provides some context to any discussion people want to have, is that our committee recommends Council approve that the Director Housing Services be delegated the authority to approve the city's Homelessness Prevention Program 2023-2024 investment plan, which sets out the details of the program and spending plan outlined in this report, and to submit it to the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. Number 2, that in the event additional funding becomes available under the Homelessness Prevention Program due to any reallocation by the ministry, the Director Housing Services will be delegated the authority to amend the plan and allocate the additional funding within the HPP service categories in keeping with this report. 3, that the consolidation of the city-funded housing and homelessness investment plans, supports and social housing program, and other homelessness funds into a single city homelessness funding program that follows the guidelines of the provincial homelessness prevention program, as well as any applicable city policies, programs, and objectives approved by council as further outlined in this report. And number 4, suspending the notice required under subsection 29(3) and 34(1) of the procedure bylaw to consider this report as its meeting on May 24th in order to consider the provincial timeline. So I just wanted to do that so that we have some direction for the conversation. If anyone does have any questions, did anyone have any questions about this recommendation, these recommendations? Okay, see Councillor Johnson.
Good morning. I just wanted to understand what the implications are for delegated authority with respect to the ever-evolving funding envelope coming from the province. How will we expect reporting to come through this delegated authority over time, and how might we see responsive reporting if things change from the province as they do?
Through you, Madam Chair, delegated authority is granted under the delegation of authority bylaw, which is reported to council annually. In addition, we, like this report, will bring reports forward to council to annually identify how that delegated authority is being affected in terms of, for instance, in this case, the HPP spending plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Councillor Carr.
Okay, sorry, me again. I have a few questions. So first of all, with respect to the recommendations, the report recommendation, recommendation 3 speaks to the fact that recommendation 2 speaks to the fact that if in the event additional funding becomes available under the HPP due to any reallocation by the ministry, the director, blah, blah, blah. And the report details the fact that we're in discussions right now with the province. I just want to make sure that that additional funding, if it's granted, goes to the relief of the folks that are living in the physical distancing centers that are in Ward 18 and Ward 12, because it was indicated at the last council meeting that because there wasn't sufficient funds received from the province, that was what was in jeopardy. But yet the recommendation 2 doesn't speak to that specifically. It speaks to the fact that the additional funding would be allocated within the HPP service categories. I guess that's a question, and I have a couple more.
Through you, Madam Chair, it is correct that if we were to receive additional funding in this year and in 2024, that we would take a holistic approach to allocating that funding. We have been given direction by council to move out of physical distancing centers. So that is a goal that we are currently working towards.
Okay, thank you. I just have a couple more questions. I'll ask this one first. I would like to hear a little bit more about the pilot program, and you asked Mr. Levine to speak to that last time. And specifically, I do have a question. It talked about essentially your initial pilot's going to help serve between 5 to 10 families, and it's basically going to be a program that's equivalent to RGI. So sort of what I was asking about last time, like how do we create those units? And I just wondered the rationale with starting with large families. I completely understand that we've got a lot of them. We've got them living in the hotels, motels. But when I look at that overhoused data, what I see is a lot of people that are overhoused in those 4 or 5 bedroom units. And if we could open up more RGI units for 1 bedrooms, which is probably cheaper, and get the list moving, would we necessarily need that benefit? So that's, I'll leave that at I'll leave that as my question, and then I do have a couple more.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I would say both strategies are needed and would be effective. I think using a multi-pronged approach here would be is sensible, in that we do have some immediate needs where our staff have been working diligently with certain families to address this this critical need because there is no other option. And so this pilot is going to be very, very instrumental for us to see if we can be successful in moving a larger family into homes and out of the shelters more quickly, and so that they can enjoy the stabilization that they should have while raising their kids. So the pilot is going to start with families that are 7 and more, and we are targeting 5 to 10 families for the pilot, and it's going to give them access to those larger units on the private market that is not factored in when we have the average market rent in the calculation provided. So that's going to give them the upper hand to access housing that is more affordable and a unit that is more appropriately sized.
Okay, thank you. Also in the same report, it speaks about the deficit from the overhousing on offsite hotels and motels for family, and it talks about this being an operating deficit of approximately 8 million. That's what it was last year. I take it in 2022. Why is that a deficit? Is there no cost recovery from the province? Like, why is it that the city needs to take that on? And you know, if you could just give statistics as well about the number of families in those motels, hotels, like it's like 1,000 or so units. If you could speak a little bit about that and explain why the city has to absorb that cost in its entirety. And if you could also clarify that that does not include the IRCC families that are in hotels, motels. These are just city funded. If you could clarify that, I'd appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. So in 2013, the province restructured their homelessness funding, CHIPPY funding as it's called. And at that time, prior to 2013, the city would receive a per diem funding for the shelter costs, and which in turn the city would pass on to the providers. In 2013, that stopped. The province capped our funding amount for shelters and restructured the funding, but gave us greater flexibility to move the funding within different funding lines. And so that's why there's no more money to compensate from the province if our needs exceed the actual funding that we have. So right now we're in a period of excessive needs that we need to provide services for, but those needs can fluctuate, and we're hoping that we're going to see less investment in shelters and more investments in permanent supportive housing or housing with supports to make sure that people move out of the shelters, but also investing more in homelessness prevention, which is the other part of the investment here. You know, if people are housed, we want to make sure we want to do everything we can to keep them housed, because this is not a friendly housing market to get back into. And once people destabilize, it's very hard to get them back up there. So the other investments that we're proposing here, is which we've been piloting since 2022, based on feedback from our community partners, was we needed something to prevent people from households, families that are struggling, their life circumstances change, whether it's been a sudden change in income. Can we just, have something, a benefit that would just stop things for a little while until they got back on their feet? And we're seeing great results for that. So.
Okay, thank you. And just with respect to the allocations that are being proposed here for emergency shelter, housing assistance, supportive housing, all of that data that was transmitted to the province in order to get these allocations, is that all from HIFIS? Is that where all the data comes from? So when the funding, the allocations, you're proposing the allocations based on the provincial allocation, but the data that is provided to the province on the number of people in shelters, the number of people in supportive housing, is that all coming from HIFIS, or do you have various data sources?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, it is provided through HIFIS.
Okay, last question, and just a follow-up to that, because it's all related to the allocation. Are all housing providers, shelter providers within the system, do they all have access to HIFIS and are able to update?
Through you, Madam Chair, all the agencies or service providers that are in receipt of homelessness funding, yes, they are a part of HIFIS, but that would exclude like community housing, which are not part of this funding, right?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well.
Counselor Troster. Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you so much, Paul and Clara. My question to you is, if we had received the funding that we believe we are owed, which is roughly another $18 million, what would be in this plan that's not in it now? General terms is fine. I'm just curious about how you would have written this and presented it to us if we had received the money we were owed.
Through you, Madam Chair, I think we have a long list of priorities right now of things that you know, we would like to fund or are in need of funding. We would of course consult with our service providers, and we would have brought back an investment plan that would have been broader, more comprehensive, and more tailored to many of the needs that are out there. But what we are presenting is a plan that is based on the funding amount that we do currently have, and we can't say, we don't know if we'll have more. So, but if we have more, there is plenty of investments to be made based on community feedback.
And Madam Chair, I would add that part of refreshing the 10-year plan will include consultation and engagement with our sector and with people using the system and the services within the system. And that will give us even more clarity as to how we in the future will use the $48 million investment by the province, which I would like to underscore is the largest investment that the city receives to support this homelessness, to try and eradicate homelessness, to support people who are homeless. We value the partnership with the province. We count on that funding. What's happening is the needs in Ottawa are shifting and changing. And as Paul explained, policy changes made before today have moved us from a per diem, per person funding scenario to a block funding scenario. And now we're in a position where we have to move as much funding around as possible to adjust and flex to meet the new needs that become apparent as we move along. And that's why the delegated authority provisions are to enable us to make quick funding decisions that are required to address the needs in the community and to fulfill the will of council, which is to move out of a physical distancing center model and move into a more permanent supportive housing model. To do that, we need some flexibility with the funding envelopes that we have. And right now they're very prescribed, especially when we look at the one that the city is 100% funding. That enables us to do quite a lot in terms of responding in creative and innovative ways. And that's why you're seeing the family pilot, the large family pilot, because COP doesn't give us the tools. So our staff are amazing. Our staff have come forward with a very creative model to try and help us move families out of large families out of homelessness into more permanent housing. And the bridge housing pilot or program that's in the report is another one that we started last year with singles who are in shelters to move them out of shelters rapidly and sustain their housing with a bridge funding support for 6 months. That kind of creative approach is not afforded to us under the provincial program. So the flexibility through the delegated authority is critical to enable us to bring forward, in consultation with the sector, innovative and creative solutions to move people out of shelter, because we are all wanting people to not be in shelters any longer than they need to be in shelters. So we want to move them out of shelters. So we need some flexibility. We need that sort of authority to be able to make those flex decisions.
Okay, so thank you very much. Am I correct in assuming, though, that without a major increase either from council in 2024 or from the province now and moving forward, that this program, while it's extremely valuable and is helping so many people, will not make a significant difference in reducing the number of people experiencing homelessness in our city, which I believe is at about 2,000?
Through you, Chair, yes, it's part of the funding that we have right now.
I'm not trying to put you in a difficult
No,
position.
no, you're not. I'm just
Yeah.
sort of gathering my thoughts. The funding that, as I explained, that we have right now, what we want to do as we review over the next year, our 10-year plan is to look at the funding we have right now and say, can we do better? Can we move things around a little better in consultation with the sector to address the needs that are today apparent? And, you know, as Paul explained, given the changes in the funding model, last year we had an $8 million deficit that we were able to absorb and find solutions for in other ways. This year, we are projecting a similar deficit because nothing has sort of changed in terms of the needs right now. The needs far outweigh the available emergency shelter spaces. What we're doing is we're working very closely with financial services to identify all of our anticipated potential deficits to our sheltering budget and to bring that forward to council at budget time.
Okay, so I'll say the thing that I wouldn't expect staff to say, which is that we need to have a serious conversation when we're looking at the 2024 budget. Because we keep budgeting, assuming we're going to receive a certain sum of money from other levels of government. And then when it doesn't happen, we end up with deficits. And we have a homelessness emergency. So I think while I agree that we shouldn't be using property taxes to fund things that other levels of government are doing, I think we're going to hit a point where the rubber hits the road. We have to decide if we want to be ambitious or not on this file. Because I'm concerned that while we're doing all this amazing work, the numbers are staying more or less the same. There's still people falling into homelessness. There's still a huge number of chronically homeless individuals who are spending more than 6 months a year in the shelter system, and that's really unacceptable. But that is, I applaud all the work you're doing, and I know that the programming that you put together really does change lives, so thank you so much. I just have one more question. So I really welcome the pilot project for large families. I think that's great. But the average price of a one-bedroom apartment, certainly in my ward, is over $2,000. And the numbers that you put together for the additional subsidy assume that you can rent a 5-bedroom townhouse for $1,882. Have you found such unicorns? Because I've certainly never seen them. I'm just wondering what that's, or is that subsidy assuming that the household has other income that can make up the difference? It's in this section where you mention increasing the subsidies. Let me just go in there. Okay, so this is page 16. So the couple with, okay, go with the single parent with 6 children. So it's fantastic that the pilot benefit would be much higher at $1,486. But the question is, as a housing services team, have you found housing that would house 7 people for essentially $1,500 a month? Or should we be bumping that subsidy even higher? My concern is that it's more, but is it even close to enough?
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair. That is the benefit amount. It's not the total income amount. Right, so the COB benefit is 1,026 towards the cost of housing of rent. You increase that to 1,486 to combine with their actual household income.
Okay. Do we have a sense of what the average household income of a family of that size living in shelter is right now?
not.
Through you,
a
Madam
budget.
Chair, it's difficult to say, depending on their eligibility for child tax benefits, for instance.
Okay, well, I welcome that program. I would love to see us really closely monitor the outcomes in the next
Mhm.
couple of years, because I'm concerned. The problem, of course, is that supplements, I know people are rejecting supplements. I've heard this because the rents are so high that they're not getting them very far. So they'd rather wait for rent geared to income. So they're willing to stay in shelter longer because they think they're going to get a better shot at permanent affordable housing. And the problem with these housing portable benefits, they're great, but in an out of control housing market, they're not getting you very far. So I welcome this project to raise the benefit for larger families, but I'm just concerned that we're not raising it high enough. And we all know what we need is nonprofit permanently affordable housing because we can't rely on the private market here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Kavanaugh.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the work that's being done for the large families because it's extremely sad because I have a motel, by the way, just at the top of my street. So, and the shelter across the street. So they're not all downtown. But it's a concern when you see a family using 2 motel rooms and they're a large family. Is this a growth? Is this, we're seeing more and more large families coming with like single parent families? This is, or is this just more recent?
Thank you, through you, Madam Chair. At present, we have identified 21 families who are in this situation, just to give you a sense. But it has been a regular occurrence, and our goal is to eliminate that need through this program. Make sure that they don't stay in the shelters longer than they need to.
Thank you. I believe OCH is also working on making larger units, continuing to create larger units, not just the ones that they have. In terms of the sites that we're looking at for the future, is this part of the strategy as well? Like we have our 20 identified sites for affordable housing. Is that part of the plan?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, it's always part of the plan to include a variety of unit sizes. It's more challenging to have 4-bedroom units in a building, like architecturally, it's more difficult. But so that's why we see a lot less constructed as part of that. But it's always, every time I have an opportunity to put a plug in for more larger units, I do. But I am understanding the constraints as well.
Yeah, no, we've been looking high and low,
Yeah.
as you know. I've been trying to find places. And it's an issue with the cost as well, in terms of the owner of the properties. Is there anything we can do in terms of the advocacy to the provincial government? Happy to do anything, because I still think there's a glimmer of hope, because it's just so unfair right now.
Through you, Chair, we are very, very grateful of the work that the mayor and council have put forward to hear our staff position on the funding allocation and support our ongoing advocacy for more funding or for our fair share of funding.
So it sounds like we have a school group coming into the room.
No way.
So maybe we'll continue, and then if they do come in, we'll just pause to wait for them to get settled, but.
Sure, they'll learn a lot. Yeah, sorry, I missed the last part of your question, your response.
My apologies. I was just expressing gratitude to council and the mayor for your work in supporting our staff position to request our fair share of funding, and that will continue. That will continue.
Thank you very much. Is there, I'm hoping that what we're looking at is a non-growth of motels, because it's extremely sad. I appreciate we have our own shelter. The Carling shelter, for example, is there. I just wanted to know that we're definitely trying to curb that growth. Is that the case?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we're absolutely trying to curb that growth.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kavanaugh. I do really quickly, I do want to state too that, the mayor's office has been hard at work, continued advocacy with the province. We know that the province has been reaching out to some of our community stakeholders, providing, asking questions. That's a good sign that they're validating the information, that they're working with not just the city, but also our community. Because at the end of the day, this lack of money impacts our community and impacts the most vulnerable. So continued advocacy through the mayor's office as a funneling source and making sure that we're there, once again, if we need to work together as a council to make sure that the province knows that this funding is it's important and direly needed. So I just very quickly, Councillor King, before I go to you, I did want to ask, following up on one of Councillor Troster's questions, this is to staff. You had mentioned if additional funding does become available, that you will then have delegated authority if these recommendations are approved to maneuver quickly on this. Will there be a mechanism through which you can then report back to committee and let us know how that has been invested?
Through you, Chair, yes, absolutely. We would come back with a memo to council to identify where we have received funding and how we've adjusted the spending plan.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor King, you're still on the list? Okay, Councillor King.
Thank you so much. And I do appreciate Councillor Kavanaugh's question about advocacy. Just a few weeks ago, I was able to attend the Association of Municipality of Ontario's symposium on homelessness in Toronto. And that was a big focus, was around advocacy, not just for our city, but also other cities throughout the province. And frankly, I had the opportunity to buttonhole the Deputy Assistant Minister for Housing and really tell her the challenge that we really face, which is, choosing between being able to fund emergency shelters or permanent housing and not being able to do both. So it's very frustrating. And I really thank you for that line of inquiry with staff. The challenge is, having enough funding for programming. And I'm really pleased to see this pilot. And of course, I'm zealous like all my other colleagues. And I think Paul might have answered the question in the sense that I know in the report it said 15 families, but you said 21 families, so that might be an updated number. I'm just curious, how much funding is necessary to really convert this pilot into a full program, or to at a minimum service those 21 families?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. In the long run, we fully intend to help the 21 families, even though this is a pilot. And to help those 21 families, we're talking about 355 to 380,000 annually, which would be a sound investment. We will start with our 10 and evaluate and go from there, as we do with all of our projects and programs. But I foresee that we'll be able to help all those families.
I appreciate that answer. And if the number had been more around 10 to 15 and we're only able to help 5 to 10, would have been my inclination to seek a way to really help that number of families, because while I appreciate it is 7 to 10 people, which is a large number, when we look at the number that you quoted back to us, obviously in the context of our budget, that seems to be a rounding error. So, I mean, I agree with Councillor Troster that we'll have to work harder to find some more dollars for investments. The next question I had, and I guess they're all number questions in the sense, is that the homeless prevention program from the province requires that all service providers contribute to the city's by name list. When I was at that symposium, I heard excitement actually from the municipalities that they have this tool to be able to track residents in real time and try to assist them either in terms of prevention or finding housing. I just wanted to know how many, and it says in the report that the submission of the list was supposed to close April 1st. So I'm just wondering how many people are currently on that list for the city of Ottawa?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, the city of Ottawa has had a by name list since 2015 when we implemented the Housing First program. Has been refined over the years, and with the implementation of the new HPP program, our staff has been working diligently over the year to to improve our data collection tools and make sure that we streamline our data collection and analysis from all of our various funding streams. So on the list of chronically homeless, there's different lists, chronically homeless, all of homelessness. But I could come back to you with those exact numbers if you want, or send us a request for information in terms of the exact type of data sets that you would like.
Yeah, I would appreciate a listing because I think other municipalities are seeing that as an excellent tool to track progress. And I know that in our first meeting, obviously, we did move motions that asked for
Correct.
numbers. So that might be sufficient in and of itself in terms of the tool, but we definitely would love to see that reporting because obviously this is an amazing tool for us to ensure that we're making progress, or if we're not making progress, to ascertain the added resources that we would require in terms of investments. So thank you so much for the pilot. I'm really excited about that. And like I said, like my other colleagues, I'm really zealous about us moving forward as quickly as possible to ensure that those families that are experiencing chronic homelessness are housed as quickly as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Conseiller Plante.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Avant que je commence, je voulais juste faire un petit shout-out à l'école élémentaire Le Phase qui est ici aujourd'hui dans la salle. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I just wanted to ask a question because it does relate to delegated authority. I know we have instructions from council to move away from shelters in our recreational centers, but in the event of an emergency or some sort of dire circumstances, and we could argue we are in that area, that situation right now, it would, however, give staff delegated authority to put shelters in our recreational centers if the need was there, correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, the spending plan that we're here to talk about today is speaking to a different set of delegated authority. We will bring an update. We will bring an update on the authority in question as part of our June report coming back to this committee, the transition to housing report.
Merci.
Councillor DeRoche.
Thank you, Chair. I note from the report that as part of the allocation, we have about $2.4 million that we're going to spend in administration, and I don't doubt that that's needed to deal with the complexity of this file. But I sometimes wonder what are we doing to track the admin dollar in the administration? It's a very, very complicated field with a lot of providers doing all good work, but in the healthcare sector and the education sector, you see efficiency as much as it presents challenges. I'm not so sure it's an efficient system at times. And so I'm wondering, as councillors, what tools do we have to sort of measure that it's an efficient system and we're putting in what's really needed in terms of administration. I look at the multi-phased housing initiative, the Veterans House, and I sometimes think smaller is better, really. I mean, they did a lot on that file. They went out and got partners, both the federal government and Veterans Affairs, as they should. They worked with the community to fundraise for it, and they did a fantastic job. And I sort of think sometimes maybe smaller is better. I used to think that it was bigger is better, but maybe we should be looking at these smaller organizations that seem to really be a little bit more efficient perhaps in terms of efficiency. So I guess my question is, what tools we have as counselors to know that the system's efficient, that we're putting the least amount of into admin as possible, so that we're putting it towards actually providing housing units or supports. Thanks.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for that question. So there are two administration scenarios that I believe are part of your question, Councillor. The one in the report represents our costs to operate the HPP program. So those are internal to the city. So city staff, the staff that work on the not only distribution of the funding, but to your second question, the engagement with the organization in question that receives the funding and building a relationship with that organization and doing regular reviews with the organization, doing on-site spot checks with the organization, and setting out maximum administration funds that each agency can spend. So our 5% is extremely low sector-wide. Our service providers cannot have administration higher than 15%. And it represents the staff that they require and perhaps some project support that they might require from time to time to be able to provide the services that we are contracting them for, as well as plan ahead and be able to be flexible and pivot their service delivery as needed. And we have very close relationships with our service providers. We are very efficient in terms of how the systems and the frameworks for accountability that we put into place, in addition to council directed and approved frameworks. And each of our providers, we believe, are doing their very best to be efficient. But as you say, there's always an opportunity to have those questions and to have those conversations. And we do that on an ongoing basis. And we can do that as well as part of a review, as part of our 10-year plan next year.
Great, thanks. And so there's no, like, in addition to that, there's no benchmarks that we use. I learned that the school boards, so for example, the province will say, here's your allocation for schools, right? So that it's consistent across the province. There may be some variation by region, but at the end of the day, it kind of puts in a control saying, if you're going to build a school, this is kind of what is the allocation. So if you want to build something bigger and better, you're kind of on your own. So do we have those kind of tools that when we fund, we say this is kind of the benchmark, this is the standard for housing, so that we're, again, efficient in the deployment of the resources, since it's so kind of decentralized in terms of administration?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, as a community, we in receipt of provincial federal funding and as well as the homelessness funding, we put together a framework for our goals in terms of homelessness reduction, and which is articulated into our 10-year plan. And every year we report to the province and to the federal government as well as council through our annual reporting on how we're doing in terms of achieving those targets that we have set for ourselves. For example, 25% reduction in overall homelessness over the next 10 years. We want to eliminate chronic homelessness. We want to reduce Indigenous homelessness by 25%. So our 10-year plan, that's our framework, and then we develop strategies to achieve those goals that are aspirational, but we have to fight to get there and to meet them.
Thank you. That's all for me. Thank you, Chair.
Merci. Councillor Carr.
Yeah, I'll just be quick. I found it really interesting in response to Councillor King's question that to house 10 to 15 families, the cost was approximately $385,000 in operating funds a year. Is that correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question was to
Cost of the subsidy. Yeah.
the cost to house 21 families, as opposed to the number in the pilots, would be 355 to 388.
So to house 21 families currently living in hotels and motels, likely, it would be $355,000 in operating costs. So just a comment, I previously asked for statistics when looking at the overhoused list. And I asked a question to staff in your area when Donna Gray was still there. And it would, how to create a program for rent geared to income units equivalent to the rent geared to income program in perpetuity if we could find 251 bedrooms. Now, of course, there's not 251 bedrooms, and the answer was 1.8 million per year. I just want to say to my colleagues, like, these costs are fairly low, like when we look at the cost to house people. And I think that it's going to be a really interesting term as we move forward on these, because compared to what we pay for a lot of things, these are relatively low costs to house people, get them out of our hotels, motels, get them off of our list and get them properly housed. That's just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carr. Councillor Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Further to working with on finding accommodation for large families, is it possible to approach our faith communities who are looking at developing their properties? There are a number of them. We've seen one out in Orleans that just redeveloped a property for affordable housing. And this is obviously a trend we're seeing as congregations are reduced and they have valuable properties in central locations. Perhaps we can approach them about the possibility in their plans to consider having units for larger homes, larger families, pardon me, as well. Has this been thought through about, working with them?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, it's an ongoing dialogue that we have with various religious organizations. I think that the main issue is funding. Require capital funding required to redevelop, renovate, demolish, or rebuild. That seems to be the biggest hurdle.
Okay, typically where they get their funding, they fund it themselves, or do they get any outside sources? Or, I mean, how does it work in terms of, say, for a church property?
Madam Chair, typically it's, it's the property is sold and like we can purchase or, rehabilitate as we see fit. But typically there is, it's an acquisition, it's not a lease, and capital funding is required.
Okay, but if they have maybe a unit or two that's larger, we can help out, like with our, rent geared to income or something.
Madam Chair, we could explore the feasibility of providing some housing subsidies as part of those units, apparently depending on the availability of those subsidies, the priorities of those subsidies, etc. But
Okay.
it can be explored, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. All right, seeing no further questions, the report recommendations are before us. Are these items carried?
Carried.
Thank you, everyone. We are now on item 6.1, which is a status update of committee inquiries and motions for the period ending May 9th, 2023. Is this item received? Received. Okay. Number 7 is in-camera items. We have none at the moment, nor do we have any notices of motion for a subsequent meeting. Number 9, we do have 2 inquiries, and 9.1, Conseiller Plante, is Physical Distancing Center reporting. Did you want to read that into the record? I can go to the other one. Yeah. Okay. Councillor Carr, yours is shelter system data.
Yes, so I think Councillor Plante is up there on the screen. So if she wants
Okay.
to read hers out, and I'll
We'll
do
start
mine.
with Councillor.
Perfect, thank you.
So physical distancing center, also known as PDCs, have been used across the city since 2020 with the most concentrated impacts on wards 18 and 12. A motion requesting a report on the transition out of PDCs passed committee on February 28th, 2023 and council on March 8, 2023. The motion requests a report in Q2 2023, Q2 ending in June 2023 to council. Last week, my office learned that this report has been pushed to June. It is unclear as to why this decision was made. In the same week, both councillors for Ward 12 and 18 received community groups who use Dempsey Community Center and Bernard-Gramate Arena, who wish to use the community center and arena in the fall of 2023. As such, this inquiry is requesting the following questions regarding this report be answered by Community and Social Services. Why was the report pushed back from May 23rd CSC meeting to June 27th when the PDC transition is meant to occur no later than August? How will the transition be impacted? What is the communication strategy to inform community groups, community members, and the recreational center residents of these impacts? To whom was the reasoning for this delay communicated? How many residents have been occupying Heron Road, Bernard-Gramate, and Dempsey since the move from Jim Durrell and the jail hostel in spring of 2023? Total capacity and total occupancy by month. How many of these residents were successfully rehoused? What has been the cost of operating physical distancing centers in 2023 to date? What is the projected cost for 2023 fiscal year? What is the cost to rehouse the number of individuals currently in the PDCs? Has increased staffing to this end been considered? Merci.
Merci, Councillor Plante, and staff, you're prepared to take that away?
Yes, Madam Chair, we can take that away.
Okay, merci. Councillor Carr.
All this is available. Okay.
Hi, mine's just a request for more data because I like data. So over the past year, staff have worked to restructure the reporting methods in the system for compiling data from all the funded community agencies and city operations to successfully meet the province requirements. Housing services initiatives have been focused on building a more robust data set for the housing and homelessness sector that will support data-led decision-making. Both the federal and provincial funding programs, which together make up over 3/4 of the city's homelessness funding, prioritize flexibility, system coordination, and data-informed approaches. The alignment between these funding programs is essential for the city's shift towards building an integrated systems approach with a common decision-making process and goals. As such, access to information and a solid understanding of the department's data is crucial for staff, councillors, and the public to understand and address the city's response to the ongoing housing and homelessness emergency. The following clarifications are requested to assist in understanding this. If we can scroll up. What is the total capacity and occupancy across the shelter system? In addition to the total capacity and occupancy, please present this data at the individual service provider level, including the following pieces of data: capacity and occupancy of shelters. If we can move it up. I can do it myself. Capacity and occupancy of PDCs, capacity and occupancy of hotels, motels, capacity and occupancy of IRCC spaces and hotels, if we can obtain that. Capacity and occupancy of youth beds in the shelter system, capacity and occupancy of women's beds in the shelter system, capacity and occupancy of men's beds in the shelter system, and capacity and occupancy of remaining beds not captured in the previous 3 categories in the shelter system. And beyond the shelter system, there are residents sleeping rough. In response to the inquiry, please provide the estimates of residents sleeping rough. So just trying to look at how many people total is. Okay, thank you. And thank you to the counselor that told me to slow down.
Thank you, Counselor. Appreciate it. Thank you to you both, and staff will take those both away. We're now on item 10, other business, which we have none of. So we'll continue through, and then the last item is adjournment. Is adjournment carried? Carried. Have a good rest of your day, everyone. No questions on adjournment. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.